The PlayStation 3 era is remembered with fondness, even with all the trials and tribulations the console faced at the beginning. While we look back on classics like Uncharted, The Last of Us, Resistance, Killzone, and so on, let's not forget some of the terrible games that also released. Here are 15 of the worst PS3 games ever made. Haze. Haze should have had it all. It was developed by the team behind Time Splitters, backed by a large publisher in Ubisoft, and one of the key exclusives for the PlayStation 3. Lo and behold, this epic single-player shooter was simply a mess of glitches, bland visuals, terrible writing, boring gameplay, dumb AI, and so on. It's a shame too, because the premise was genuinely interesting. Lair. Ever get that feeling of déjà vu? Lair should have had it all. Developed by the team behind Star Wars Rogue Squadron, published by Sony, and again, a key exclusive for the PS3 where you could ride and fight with dragons. Sadly, everything went wrong with Lair, from the graphics to the gameplay, and the controls were simply awful. Last Rebellion. Nippon Ichi Software can be somewhat hit or miss with their titles, but creating something that's bottom-of-the-barrel awful isn't all that common these days. Say hello to Last Rebellion, co-developed with Hitmaker for the PS3 and a horrible action RPG in its own right. The graphics and story were miserable, and even the promising combat ended up being a mess. It's one thing to expect this kind of product on the PSP in 2005, but on the PS3 in 2010? Quantum Theory. Remember when Tecmo published a horrible Gears of War clone? Quantum Theory's premise revolved around cover shooting in a living tower that, get this, added and removed cover dynamically. What seemed cool in theory was let down by, well, everything. The shooting and storytelling are worse than babysitting Dom on Insane in Gears of War 1. What more is there to say? Aliens: Colonial Marines. One of the worst games made on any platform with one of the most misleading marketing campaigns. Aliens: Colonial Marines has been rightly raked over the coals. Its campaign is drab and boring, but could have offered a fun premise for xenomorph fights. Those suck too, thanks to horrible AI, bland shooting, and numerous bugs. YAIBA Ninja Gaiden Z. The idea of YAIBA Ninja Gaiden Z was flawed from the outset. Create a spin-off to the Ninja Gaiden series, but the protagonist is a cyborg and has to fight zombies. And why not have Keiji Inafune produce it? Add cel-shaded graphics. Overall, YAIBA Ninja Gaiden Z ended up as a hodgepodge of concepts with a terrible camera, bad controls, and bizarro storytelling. Duke Nukem Forever. Duke Nukem Forever was announced in 1997 and hopped from engine to engine and design document to design document with seemingly no pause. Except, of course, when 3D Realms was downsized and sued by publisher Take-Two Interactive in 2009. Development then shifted to Gearbox Software, who decided the game was more or less done and released it in 2010. Lo and behold, it was awful in every conceivable way. If nothing else, Duke Nukem Forever makes us appreciate games like The Last Guardian and Final Fantasy XV that come out well despite long development cycles. Tony Hawk Ride. Tony Hawk Ride featured an overpriced skateboarding peripheral to mimic the feeling of skating in your living room. That this was the least offensive part of the game is saying something. Fraught with an embarrassingly lackluster career mode, poor visuals and physics, and frustrating gameplay, Tony Hawk Ride took the series to new lows. Until Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 5, at least. Amy. When you make a stealth survival horror game that has pathetic stealth mechanics, you're probably in trouble. However, Amy somehow managed to be terrible in every other way imaginable. Yes, nearly every single way, regardless if you wanted a story, decent controls, some actual horror, or a fun experience. Perhaps the real horror is in finding someone who actually thinks Amy is a good game. Call of Juarez: The Cartel. How bad could Call of Juarez: The Cartel be? It's probably not the worst game ever made, but when the CEO of developer Techland called it a mistake, you know there's an inherent degree of awfulness to it. The fact that the game wasn't ready for launch is one thing, but its incorrect depiction, among other things, is another matter entirely. All in all, Call of Juarez the Cartel is just a poor product, and the poorest version is on PS3. Sonic the Hedgehog 2006. There have been many terrible Sonic games released for the PS3, but Sonic 2006 tops them all. Not because it was the newest generation of Sonic the Hedgehog, meant to usher in a new heroic age that fell horribly flat due to bugs, glitches, terrible storytelling, and so on, but because the PS3 release came a few months after the Xbox 360's and had no improvements whatsoever. Ace Combat Infinity. No one really expected a free-to-play Ace Combat game to be any good, much less asked for. But Ace Combat Infinity was particularly bad thanks to the utter lack of content. Have fun playing a handful of missions using recycled concepts and assets from previous superior titles. The first 2 missions are free, the rest require real money payment or weeks of grinding. And again, there's nothing here that's particularly fun to engage with. Terminator Salvation. A terrible game based on a terrible movie. What more is there to say? Brain-dead AI, terrible environment design, horrid storytelling. Terminator Salvation is a tie-in cash grab at its most basic. Throw in a number of bugs, which probably would have been more if the game were any longer, and you have a terrible, terrible product. Hyperdimension Neptunia. One will never understand the appeal of Hyperdimension Neptunia. It started as an RPG with its central cast being personifications of the major consoles, and now has its own franchise. However, the first game that released for PS3 was such a poor showing that it's amazing this series continued. The story is about as intriguing and worthwhile to the console wars as E3 2019. The less said about the graphics, music, and exploration, the better. MINDJACK. Sadly, Tecmo wasn't the only company trying to make its own cover-based shooter to cash in on the Gears of War craze. MINDJACK's hook is the ability to hack into enemies and vehicles and other things to control them. That's pretty much it though, as you shuffle through unimaginative environments set against a boring campaign with awful controls, which sounds a lot like The Quiet Man, also published by Square Enix. Coincidence? We think not.
And that about does it for this video. If you enjoyed what you watched and want to see more from GamingBolt, please hit the subscribe button. Also, don't forget to switch on the notifications bell icon next to it. That way you'll never miss any of our videos. Thanks for watching.